hour and a half or so with you all. Oops, sorry, let me just accept the recording. There we go. So I won't put you all on the spot during this presentation. I have in the past done a dialogue throughout. So what I'll do is I will go through all of the slides. It tends to work best that way on Zoom, but save plenty of time at the end to make sure I capture any of your questions and to have a discussion about some of the opportunities in the legislative process that the public or constituents or advocates or lobbyists or whomever wants to interact with the legislature can, so we can discuss that at the end. So definitely do, scratch down your questions, because I really, we'll probably fly through quite a few very technical things very quickly. So I want to make sure that we can go back and revisit whatever burns as something that needs to be discussed. So anyway, so we are going to focus on the legislative process, since we have probably folks who are very well versed in that process to folks who maybe, last time you discussed this was like in high school civics. I do cover some of the basics just to set up, lay some ground, but then I'm going to take a deeper dive into how the state budget works within that process. And I think, let's see. So as Carly mentioned, we've known each other for quite some time. So I am the executive director of the Wisconsin Women's Council now. I started this role back in September, but for about a decade, I served on the board of directors for the Wisconsin Women's Network. The Women's Network runs a policy institute to train women across the state about the legislative process and how to be advocates for issues within that process. It's also a very intensive hands-on learning, leadership and communications training as well. So for anyone in the audience, I do encourage you to look into that training program. I'm sure Carly can get you connected to the right folks about it, but it's a really great way to learn about advocacy and working on policy issues that you care about. So I also served as the lead instructor for several years for their Policy Institute, but I have stepped into this new role as the executive director of the Wisconsin Women's Council. And I'll speak about what the council does in just a moment. But I mention all of this because, what makes me qualified to share with you about the legislative process are these experiences, as well as I'm recently coming from the Department of Workforce Development, where I served as their legislative advisor for about 2 years. And prior to that, I worked in policy implementation and planning and development and legislative affairs for the Department of Children and Families for many, many years. So working very much on the ground in legislative process, advocacy, and policy implementation. All right. So not to be confused with the Women's Network, the Wisconsin Women's Council has some very similar origins as a network, but we are basically a state agency. We are administratively attached to the Department of Administration. We are codified in state law. We have a very tiny state, appropriation of general purpose revenue to fund our work. But our mission is to enhance the ability of all Wisconsin women to fully and equally, to participate fully and equally in all aspects of life. And that is codified in law. Our council is our state's statutory commission on the status of women and girls. And so to accomplish that role and our mission, we work to promote initiatives that empower women. We serve as a clearinghouse for information on the status of women in the state. We conduct independent research, and we promote unique partnerships to further women's economic security, social equality, as well as to improve the state's tax base and economy. We are a bipartisan 15-member council. Half of our council is appointed by the governor. The other half are either legislators or legislative appointees. So we, work in a very bipartisan fashion, but have have direct contact and communications with legislative leadership and the governor. So today, as I mentioned, I want to make sure that we are reviewing the legislative body and process to provide that baseline level, and then understand how the state's biennial budget process works. And then we'll identify the points in the process at which the public and or other stakeholders may play a role in that process. So jumping right in, what exactly does the legislative body do? So by legislative body here in Wisconsin, I'm talking about our state legislature. They work to pass laws and resolutions. They set and approve the budget. They hold hearings and other fact-finding activities. So not just hearings on bills, but also study committees and a wide range of other engagement of research or hearing from experts on particular issues. They provide assistance to their constituents. So each legislative office has various ways of communicating and hearing from constituents, and work for you and should be open to you and make themselves accessible. So legislative offices can be emailed, called. You can, often they have district location or can set district hours, should be responsive to their constituents. And then they provide leadership on important issues. So coming out, standing up for something, speaking about an issue. So more than just lawmaking, they also, I'll talk about this in a minute, but they also have their own bully pulpit. And so then what does the executive do? So the executive branch or the governor's office signs or vetoes bills. So those bills that have gone through the legislature, the governor can sign or veto those bills. Proposes the budget, so plays a role in proposing and developing the state budget. We will spend a lot more time on that this morning. Makes appointments to commissions, the judiciary, to administration. So for example, makes appointments to my council, makes appointments to leadership at the administration. So secretaries at Department of Administration, Workforce Development, Department of Health Services, all appointed by the governor. And then, as I mentioned, the use of the bully pulpit. And I mentioned this just as sort of as a fun factoid, but bully pulpit is a term that was coined by President Theodore Roosevelt. And it means a platform or position of influence from which to carry out an agenda. So in many ways, elements of the budget process are the governor or the legislators using their bully pulpit. The governor's executive budget is really an example of the bully pulpit as it sets an agenda. The governor has a long list of things that are included in the executive budget, knowing full well that the legislature may not move all of those things through the budget bill process, but it sets an agenda, a tone, makes clear to the public what the governor's priorities are. So that's the budget is one way in which the governor can use the bully pulpit. So I mentioned these two branches because they are the branches engaged and involved in making legislation and in the budget process. I will not be speaking to the judicial branch at all in this presentation, but know that that is then that third branch. So who makes legislation happen in Wisconsin? As I mentioned, we have the executive and the legislative. So currently our executive, Governor Tony Evers, is a Democrat. And then on the legislative side, we have, two houses. We have our Senate and our Assembly, and they are currently, the majority of those seats are Republican seats. So as you can see here, the breakdown of the Senate membership and the Assembly membership. Wisconsin has 132 legislators in total. 33 of those are state senators and 99 are in the Assembly. I will just note that there is currently one vacancy, the 8th Senate District, that is up for special election here connected to our spring elections. Alberta Darling retired in December. And so right now, we do have that one vacancy in the Senate. So I just mentioned this because we when we think about the legislative process, and this is not to dive into politics of either party, but to just bear in mind that we currently have this balance of power. We have a Democratic governor and Republican-led legislative bodies. And so they have to, in order for bills, for the budget to pass, there has to be compromise. There has to be agreement and common ground found. If you have a majority across all two bodies, but across both houses and in the executive office, things can go through much more easily, more quickly, as we saw in the previous administration. So we are at a time moving into our 5th year of a Democratic led governor's office, where we're seeing this need for finding agreement, finding ability to find consensus on some things, or as things get passed through the legislature, the governor will veto them. All right, so I don't want to spend too much time on the details of legislative leadership, but just wanted to get, and you all will get these slides, so this way you have this at your fingertips, but just pointing out who all is involved with making decisions at the leadership level in the legislative body. So here we have the Senate, and as I mentioned, it's Republican majority in the Senate. So the Senate president presides over the sessions, the meetings of the Senate, the floor sessions. They ensure that other senators are following the legislative process, are abiding by the procedural rules. They have a lot of very detailed parliamentarian rules about how they conduct their business. And this is, and the next point I really want to stress to you all is that Senate leadership makes committee appointments and assigns bills to committees. So we're going to talk about committees more here in just a moment, but it is really key that we are thinking about legislative leadership and that role that they play to fulfill these appointments. Less important in all of this is the president pro tem, but just know that there is someone there that can preside over sessions when the Senate president is not available or can't, for whatever reason, preside over floor sessions. And then I just want to point out the distinction from the Senate president to the Senate majority leader. So this is more where the politics get involved. The Senate majority leader is the party's policy spokesperson, sets the agenda for party politics, party positions. They also schedule the calendar. So that's kind of interesting, but really set the legislative calendar does require passage by the legislative body. So they schedule the calendar, but then it needs passage they do that in advance. Again, they set the party's legislative agenda, political agenda, policy agenda, and they help make recommendations to committee appointments. So while the Senate president makes the appointments, legislative leadership, both minority and majority leadership, help make those nominations or recommendations. So moving on to the Assembly. Assembly leadership follows a very similar structure to the Senate. So we have the Speaker. The Speaker presides over floor sessions. The Speaker appoints committee chairs. But here's recommendations from the majority and minority party leaders. Also, the Senate or the Assembly Speaker refers bills to committees, so much like that Senate president. And again, like in the Senate, the majority and minority leaders set their party's policy, political, and legislative agendas. All right, so as I promised, a little bit more about committees. So committees are really where the bills start taking shape. And we'll get into that in just a minute about the bill process. But committees are where a bill gets introduced to. Committees are where the bill gets hearings. The committees are where a bill gets voted on before any sort of a floor session can happen with a bill. So committees are really what moves a bill through the legislative process. So committees are incredibly important. And I just want to note that the composition of the committees are proportionate to the representation of the political parties. So that's where keeping in mind about who is in leadership is very important. So for example, committees that may be relevant to your work, like the Assembly Committee on Health, Aging, and Long-Term Care, there are 11 Republicans and 5 Democrats appointed to that committee. So of the 11 Republicans, the Senate Majority Leader made recommendations to the Senate President, and the Senate President appointed those legislators to this committee. And then, I'm sorry, we were speaking about the Assembly Committee. And then for the 5 Democrats who are on that Assembly Committee, the Assembly Minority Leader would make recommendations, but still the legislative or the Assembly leadership, Assembly Speaker, makes that appointment to that committee. And then in the Senate, for the Senate Committee on Health, there are 4 Republicans and 2 Democrats. And so again, it's directly proportionate to the representation of political parties. It's also directly proportionate to the number of legislators. So there are more Assembly members on the Assembly Committee because there are more Assembly people. While leaders of both parties make recommendations for committee membership, the majority leader makes the committee appointments. So again, it's who is in power at the top that gets to make the committee appointments, as well as the committee chair appointments. So that's key as well. So they are required to have this proportionate representation on all committees, but the legislative leader gets to appoint the chair, and they're going to appoint chairs who are in their political party. They don't have to, but by and far they will. Majority leadership then refers bills to committees and determines which committee will get which bill. So Speaker Voss in the Assembly is the one to determine which bill is going to which committee, and and determine whether or not that bill even gets referred. But by and large, I would say that almost all bills don't just sit. They get referred to committee right away. The trick is then whether or not the committee actually takes up the bill. And I'll speak to that in just a moment. But I just point this out because it is key. You would think that all bills related to healthcare, to your work at the Primary Healthcare Association would go to the Health Committee. That's not always the case. So there may be some strategy and some politicking that is involved in where bills go to which committee. It's not always, by and large, it is it seems intuitive, but sometimes not so. And you may scratch your head and think about why a certain bill went to a certain committee, and there may be more to unpack there. And then why I pointed out about the importance of who is appointing committee chairs is that it's up to the committee chairs as to whether that committee is actually going to hold a hearing. So they make that decision. So the bill might be referred to that committee, but that committee chair could just never hold a hearing on it, or hold a hearing on it very quickly, with 24 hours notice. So, and they also make the decisions about whether or not to hold executive sessions on bills. Executive session is meaning take a vote on the bill that was referred to their committee. So you could have a bill that was referred to a committee, they held a hearing very quickly, but then they never take it up for a vote. So, and we can talk about that at the end of our discussion about some of the points in which you can help provide input about getting bills through committee. So this going back to basics, how a bill becomes a law. Not the best graphic. This is in and I can provide some links for Carly to share with you all, but there are some really great papers that the Legislative Reference Bureau has available on the website. And so this flow chart is coming directly from one of those papers. But yeah, it's basically back to Schoolhouse Rocks, back to how a bill becomes a law. So I keep talking about this process particularly with regard to the committees, but going back to the beginning, thinking back to our majority leadership and their ability to determine where a bill goes and who is handling the bill. But where does the bill actually start? So it starts in an individual legislative office. So legislators learn about a problem. They learn about an issue from their constituents or from news articles. Their staff have ideas about legislative changes. State agencies have ideas, needing to make changes to state law that to comply with federal law, or there's a lot of different ways in which the problem that needs a solution gets identified. But basically, it needs to start in a legislative office. So legislators learn about a problem, and it could be more than one office. But a legislator then requests that a bill get drafted to solve, the bill is going to solve the problem. So the bill is drafted by the Legislative Reference Bureau. I don't spend a lot of time in this presentation talking about the service agencies of the legislature. However, do know that they exist. They have 5 different service agencies that provide support to them. And one of those is the Legislative Reference Bureau, which is by and large a big group of attorneys who draft legislation. They also are the sort of keepers of state law. So they're the ones to publish it. They're the ones to provide history about it and background about it. So I'll speak a lot about LRB and less about some of the other service agencies. So LRB, so the legislators are not actually doing the drafting. It is these attorneys in LRB. So they are drafting the bill. And then what they do is once they have a draft or several, they work with the legislative office to work through a draft that legislator feels is ready for circulation. So the bill's author, or it could be multiple people multiple offices working on one bill, send out that draft bill along with a co-sponsorship memo, seeing if other legislators will sign on to it. They want to get support for a bill early on. And so co-sponsorship memos and the draft bills are circulated, and for folks who want to come on as a sponsor or an author are invited to do so. And that's where this bipartisanship really does help move a bill through. So folks, if you're seeing both parties sign on to a bill, that is where you've already seen agreement. You are seeing support from both parties on that bill, which is not to say that ensures that it gets through, but it can certainly help when you have a governor who is of a different political party than the party that has majority leadership. So then once they have gotten all of their sponsors and co-authors sign on to a bill, the bill is then introduced either in the Assembly or the Senate, if introduced, or simultaneously. So it can go through, typically they have, bills are introduced in both houses at about the same time. It just really helps the process flow. But it's not unheard of that something makes its way through the Assembly even before a bill has been introduced in the Senate, or vice versa. So so the bill is introduced, and like I said, legislative leadership refers that bill to a committee. So Speaker Voss will refer it to an Assembly committee, or President Kapenga will refer it to a Senate committee, or both. So then the bill is publicly published, the bill draft. It's available for you all to see and view and learn about. And at that time, LRB makes requests of state agencies to do what is called fiscal estimates. So the state agency that is impacted by that bill is then asked to identify and define what kind of impact the bill will have on state budget, on federal funding, like just sort of any impact, if it will have any impact on business. So anything any fiscal impact it could have. So they submit the fiscal estimate, and that just provides more information to you as a public member about how this bill is going to impact things, and to the committees. So the committee chair then has the bill, right? So they've been assigned this bill by legislative leadership, and so the committee chair may or may not schedule the bill for a public hearing. They are required to give 24 hours notice, but they don't have to give any more than that. So committee hearings often can come up very quickly, especially later and later in the session as they're running out of time to get things through. So sometimes committee hearings are on very short notice. So folks who are wanting to appear at a public hearing about a bill have to be ready. You have to be ready to go. But again, committee chairs can sit on a bill and it can wait and wait and wait, not even have a hearing through the whole session. So then if the committee holds a hearing, that is an opportunity for state agencies, for advocacy organizations, for lobbyists, for the public to go and speak to the committee on the bill to provide support or to tell them why they don't agree with the bill, or just to provide information only. So you'll often see state agencies not taking a position on a bill, but providing information only to explain the impact of the bill. So these public hearings are typically more than one bill is heard in a day per committee, but sometimes it is just one bill and it can take all day. So then, based on public testimony of state agencies, whomever has provided information at these hearings, the committee will often identify, or potentially maybe one of the speakers at the committee hearing have identified things that need to be fixed in a bill. So the bill overall may be something that folks support, but there might be some technical issues or something, even references to other state laws needs to be fixed. And so in order to adjust the bill at this time, they do need to make amendments. So the committee members or the committee chair will work with, and often the authors will work with Legislative Reference Bureau to make amendments. Anyway, so if you reach that point, then the committee chair may schedule an executive session. And that means they would schedule the bill for a voting. So in order for the bill to move out of committee, they have to schedule a session and it has to be approved by a majority of the committee members. So if the bill passes out of committee, then it's ready for legislative leadership to take the next steps. And at this point, if the bill hasn't already moved through the committee process in the other house, it's probably wise that legislative leadership across both houses talk to each other and move bills through to make sure that they are, if a bill is headed to the floor in one house, they work to get the bill through the process through the other house. And then once the bill has passed through the committee process, Legislative Council, so another service agency for the legislature, they prepare a memo on the bill. Leg Council, they are the attorneys for the legislature. So a little different than Reference Bureau. Reference Bureau are attorneys, but they're the bill drafters and the keepers of state law, whereas Leg Council actually provides the advice to legislative leadership. And so this memo is really just to help the entire body. So, your bill has basically only lived in committee so far. So those committee members know the bill really well. They've heard all the testimony, but that they need to have that information shared with the rest of their house because everyone has to vote on the bill. So the memo that Leg Council drafts really does provide that background information to all the other legislators who have not been involved in that committee. And then legislative leadership is able to schedule the bill for a vote. In order, as I mentioned, for the bill to pass both houses, it has to be held, floor vote has to be held in both houses, and it has to pass by a majority vote for it to go to the governor. So then if both houses have passed a bill, the bill goes to the governor, and the governor then decides whether or not to sign that bill into law. And so if the governor signs the bill into law, that is when the bill becomes an act. And it is publicly published in state law by Legislative Reference Bureau. Or the governor may decide to veto the bill. And that happens quite a bit in this when we have different parties in office in the executive branch and the legislative, or in leadership in either branch. So then after the bill becomes law, that is when relevant state agencies and departments then implement that bill. So that work never ends. All right, so that's a little bit about, at a high level, the legislative process. Carly, just want to check in the chat. Is there a question or?
No, excuse
Okay.
me, there, not yet, but if anyone feels,
Okay.
anyone has any questions, please let us know.
Thanks. All right, so the budget bill. So our budget process, right? The budget bill is just another bill. However, it does have a special process called the biennial budget process, and it has a special committee. So it's already predetermined which committee this bill is going to go to, and that is the Joint Committee on Finance. And that is one of the standing committees, and not the makeup of that committee is determined by legislative leadership, but that committee just lives in perpetuity. And then there is a special service bureau. So we've had LRB helping with all of the other bills. With the budget bill, we have the Legislative Fiscal Bureau helping. So they are the service agency to the legislature specific to the state finances. All right. So I'd identified some of the key players and processes with regard to just a standard bill, but in the budget bill process, it's very similar, but it is sort of a very like hyper drive level of engagement and who the key players are because of how the bill originates. It doesn't originate with the legislative office. It originates with the governor's office and our state budget office. The state budget office differs from the Legislative Fiscal Bureau. The state budget office lives within the Department of Administration, and they work directly with the governor's office. We'll talk about what that work is in just a moment. As I mentioned, within the service agents or the Joint Committee on Finance is the committee that will get the budget bill. And the people involved in that are the legislators that are appointed to that committee and their staff. I also mentioned the Legislative Fiscal Bureau. Again, these are really the bean counters of the budget bill process, and they provide all kinds of fiscal information to the Joint Committee on Finance once the bill has been introduced. State agencies are really key in the budget process, not just during the bill process when Joint Finance is taking up the budget, but actually are at the origins of the bill. The media, now is budget season. And so you're seeing all kinds of articles and all kinds of media about governor's messaging on the budget, legislative leadership messaging on the budget, where it's at in the process. So they play a key role. Advocacy organizations like yourself will play a key role in the budget process, providing, testimony at hearings, working with legislative or Joint Committee member offices about particular issues in the budget that you care about, and then the public. So the public is involved in many ways within the budget process. Let me just make sure I hit everything on there that I wanted to. Okay, so the Joint Committee members on Finance, there's not a lot to say here about this slide, but just wanting to show you who the current members are. Again, you'll have these slides so you can refer back to them, but it is a 16-member committee comprised of legislators from both the Senate and the Assembly. Again, they're appointed by party leadership in that proportion, so that reflects the majority party versus the minority party. So you'll see here, there are, I'm not going to do the math that quickly, but there's only 2 Dems from the Senate and 2 Dems from the Assembly, and so the rest are Republicans. So it's proportional to the composition of the parties in majority and minority. All right. So we just went through the legislative process. So I want you to really keep that in mind because it follows a very similar process, but I'm going to point out where it does differ. And I'm going to use the current timeline to help make a case or provide the example of how the bill is currently moving through the process. And this, by and large, is going to stay the same biennium after biennium after biennium. So Wisconsin's government does budget on a biennial or 2-year basis. Right, the current enacted budget, the budget that we are currently working under, goes through June 30th of this year. So we need a new budget by July 1. But the goal is that the current proposed budget, so the goal is that the current proposed budget will be approved by July 1. However, Wisconsin is unique. Unlike the federal government and a lot of other states, we do not shut down if the budget is not passed by July 1. So there have been years, you may recall, where the budget process has gone on even well into October, into that new state fiscal year. However, we don't shut down. We continue to operate, but spending levels are at what they were under the previous budget. It does cause going past July 1 can wreak havoc on legislation within the budget bill or appropriations where federal dollars are come into play, but that all gets very technical within the state agencies' budget and finance offices. So I'm not going to spend any time going on to that, but just know that we don't shut down and we just keep spending at the previously approved levels. So I just want to point out that for the public, the budget process seems like it only takes a couple months. However, it is continuous. It never really stops. And it is, once a budget bill gets passed, it really is like, especially for state agencies, we're just on the same 2-year loop there and there, thereafter. And that's where we begin. The budget bill really does start with state agencies. So throughout the even numbered years, state agencies, their leadership, their budget offices, the divisions within the agencies, they work with the agency leadership to prepare that agency budget request. So last June, Governor Evers sent a letter to all state agencies requesting their proposed budgets. This letter provides detail about what the governor expects to see in the state agency request, meaning whether or not, so for example, Governor Evers has often asked state agencies to prepare budgets that don't have any increases or don't add any new positions, or, in years past, you've seen the governor request a 5% reduction in a state budget request, agency budget request. So while the state agencies know that they need to prepare the budget, this letter it really is more of agenda setting and key to how they go about developing the budget. So really, I will point out that agency work actually probably begins about the February prior to this letter. So knowing that they're going to have to develop their budget request in an even numbered year, in February, they're already starting, their issue papers and figuring out, working with stakeholders about what's important and where things need increases or need to be shifted or new positions need to be added. And so the governor's letter is not pro forma, but they've already started their work, but it may shift the direction in which their work will go. And then by law, state agencies are required to submit their budget requests by September 15th of every even numbered year. So state agencies know that they're going to have to do that, and it does need to be submitted by the 15th. So last fall, agency budget requests were submitted to the Department of Administration, and I mentioned before, the state budget office, and they are housed at DOA. So those are the folks that are going to work on the budget bill development thereafter. So agencies made their requests, and then the SBO prepares the executive budget proposal. So from that date of September 15th until the date in which the governor is introducing the budget, SBO is preparing the bill. And so that's what they did over the fall and winter this year for the 2023-25 executive budget. They worked closely with the governor's office and then also within the agencies to address questions and issues. I myself have answered questions to the state budget office about what a particular proposal within an agency request means.
Jen,
Um,
can you give some examples of what a state agency, um, yeah, a couple of examples of state agencies?
oh, certainly. So like the Department of Children and Families, Department of Health Services, um, any, Department of Workforce Development, even Department of Administration needs to have an agency request, even though they're the ones overseeing the budget development with the governor's office. They need that operational money. We need IT support, and and the budgets also help determine how federal dollars are spent, and how things are allocated across these agencies. Yeah, does that, and also, you all included would be not just departments, but the Office of the, or OFI, financial institutions. So there are some agencies that aren't called department, but they are considered agencies, and they would have their own budget request. So
Great,
yeah.
thank you.
And during this time, that's typically when the Senate and Assembly announce their Joint Finance Committee members. As I said, Joint Finance is a standing committee, but because there is, we have that election every fall in even numbered years, the composition of who's in the Senate and Assembly change. And so there may be some shift to who is sitting on Joint Finance. So that typically gets announced in December, just before folks are inaugurated in January. And though not required, just like the previous two budget cycles, Governor Evers has held listening sessions in December and January to hear from the public about what they want to see achieved in the state budget. So feedback from these listening sessions has been incorporated into additions to the budget bill that the governor's office makes. So I can provide a very clear example of that. The Wisconsin Women's Council did not have an increase included in the Department of Administration's agency budget request, but I was able to work with the governor's office and the state budget office to develop an initiative that was included in the budget that the governor introduced back in February that would provide an additional $100,000 over the biennium for the Women's Council to do some much needed research. So though not introduced in an agency budget request, was still able to get the initiative included. So that was through the work of the state budget office. So then the governor releases the executive budget in February of every odd numbered year. The date can fluctuate a little bit, but it's typically early to mid-February. This year was February 15th. The governor delivered his budget address and introduced the executive budget. So on that date is the date that it is introduced to the legislature. So legislative leadership submits sends the budget bill to the Joint Committee on Finance. And so now the budget is in their, that ball is in their court. So Joint Finance is responsible for really processing where this budget bill goes next. So typically Joint Finance begins holding hearings with state agencies. So as we mentioned, those departments that submitted their agency requests, their leadership will have to come before Joint Finance. So for example, at Department of Administration, Secretary Kathy Blumenfeld will lead a briefing for Joint Finance. Typically these start in late February or early March, but we have not yet had any of these agency budget hearings scheduled yet. So it's definitely happening later this year. It's a little bit interesting.
And then Jen,
Yeah.
just to go back a step, we have a question in the chat of how do Wisconsinites know when forums like Do the Right Thing budgeting listening sessions are happening? So how's
Yes,
the public notified?
that's a good question. So Governor Evers does have you can follow their social media. They will be announced via social media, but you can sign up for press releases from the governor's office. And that's really when they start announcing those. Additionally, there is a budget website, and I'll make sure that those links are provided to Carly to distribute to you all. That does lay out those dates and provides like the registration information and and all of that, but it does get announced via press release by the governor's office. With regard to the joint finance hearings that we're going to hear about, they also disseminate them via press release. The press picks it up. That's very clear. It's also available on the legislative website. So once they do get scheduled, you can find all the details in the calendar on the legislative website. I did not spend any time on the legislative website here today, but often in this training I do, because it is a wealth of information and a very, very important resource for your ability to follow this process. So it does require that you seek some stuff out, but you can get on notification services through the legislative website. So you can sign up to receive notices when there's a calendar update from Joint Finance. So you would learn about those hearings that way too. So it takes a little legwork on your part in the beginning, but if you get on these lists, you're going to get a lot of emails and you'll find out.
Sorry, Bella, do you have a question?
I do. I had just kind of noticed that for both the Do the Right Thing forum and with the Joint Finance Committee, both of these, like, none of them are held in Madison or Milwaukee, and just kind of wanted to get an idea of why.
I know that they have in years past done some in Milwaukee or out like greater Milwaukee region, or even down in Racine and Kenosha, but I think it's about getting trying to get regional input to be out in balance of state, basically, because so much of government, I mean, it's all happening here in Madison. All of the agency hearings and all of the joint finance committee sessions are all going to be in Madison. And so it's really their opportunity to get out to other parts of the state to hear from those folks. So in some ways it's accessibility, some ways it's exposure, some ways it's being in those communities that are impacted by the budget, and not just staying insular in Madison and then Milwaukee right second. Like legislative events and governor's things happening in Madison all the time. Next would be Milwaukee, right? So just trying to diversify, I think. And, we saw from the pandemic, there was, that first biennium process during the height of the pandemic, we saw all of the sessions, all of the committee, all joint finance hearings and the governor's listening sessions that were virtual. And then last year, or the last biennium, I believe the governor's listening sessions were all still virtual, but Joint Finance did their roadshow and had one virtual listening session. They are not doing a virtual session this year. The governor's listening sessions were, I think they held a couple virtual listening. He held a couple virtual listening sessions, but Joint Finance is not holding any virtual hearings this time around. However, what they have added, and you'll see here on this slide, is that there's a portal to submit testimony to, and an email address that folks can send their testimony in as well. So that's, I don't know, I've not really seen that advertised before. I don't know if they had a mechanism, but that is something that they are promoting this year. And the governor's listening sessions differ from these hearings. So I will say that before I dive into these. So the governor's listening sessions were really about him sharing some ideas about what, it's because the sessions happened after these agencies submitted their requests. So there's already ideas and proposals on the table. So there's some idea of what the overall proposal will include. And so it's an opportunity for the governor's office to share some of that, but also then to hear from folks to make some changes before the bill gets introduced. Whereas the joint finance hearings are kind of an opportunity of those listening sessions, but it is really truly an opportunity for the public, for advocacy organizations, lobbyists, whomever, to make testimony about the specific bill. So we actually have a tangible bill. So much like any other committee hearing, you have that bill, you know what's in it, or you know someone who's told you what's in it, because it's thousands of pages of long. There's a lot of great resources that provide summary of the budget so that you can learn a little bit more about what's included. The budget in brief document is quite lengthy, but is a fraction of what the budget document is. that is really provides an overview, so you can really use that as a tool to understand what's in the budget. And so the Joint Finance is holding these public hearings, because when they come back and hold their agency hearings, or they hold their agency hearings in advance of these public hearings, typically, the public is not invited to speak at those. You are welcome to attend or view on Wisconsin Eye, but it really is a briefing that the agency provides to Joint Finance, and so they have to hold these public hearings so that folks can provide their testimony. So then that's the next step. And like I said, Joint Finance has not scheduled agency hearings, but they have scheduled their public hearings, and they're all happening next month. All right. So also, since the governor released the budget back in February, Legislative Fiscal Bureau, again, that service agency of the legislature, has been busy analyzing the budget, and then writing what are called budget papers. These budget papers are a wealth of information for the public and for the legislators involved in the process. They provide detailed analysis of what each budget element means, its impacts, and it also, these budget papers provide Joint Finance Committee members with several different options. So, they can, they kind of the pros and cons of what that each initiative is saying. And it can provide, suggestions for amendments, or it provides inspiration for Joint Finance members to make amendments to the budget bill, and really just provides that careful analysis of the budget initiatives. So then after Joint Finance has held their agency briefings, they've held their public hearings, they are reviewing these budget papers from LFB, they begin voting on each piece of the budget. So taking executive action, this gives them the opportunity to make amendments to different parts of the budget. Because it's such a big bill, they really do break it down into pieces, and start passing pieces through, and it's their process to develop what is the final budget bill. So Joint Finance finishes this work of amending and shifting and creating their version of a budget bill, and they need to pass it out of their committee. And at that time, I just want to point out that the 999 motion happens at this time, which is really just an omnibus amendment to the budget bill. It happens like right as the budget's getting passed out of committee, and it compiles a vast array of anonymously introduced items as a package, and then the committee votes on those changes. The public or agencies have little chance to comment on this omnibus motion, and sometimes it includes secretive pet projects of Joint Finance members. So for example, several bienniums ago, there was an attempt to making sweeping changes to open records laws through the 999 motion. Anyway, so I just point that out, like that's something to keep a watch for at the end of Joint Finance's work on the budget. So then they passed the bill out of committee. And then just like we talked about in the legislative process before, Joint Finance's version of the budget needs to move through each house. So both the Assembly and the Senate need to review and take action on the budget bill. The houses can attempt to further amend the budget, but ultimately the same bill needs to be passed out of both houses before it can go to the governor's desk. So what if the houses can't come to agreement on what the final bill is going to look like? What if there are amendments in the Assembly that are not introduced as amendments in the Senate? That's when they hold conference committee. I'm actually not very well versed in conference committee because I've never seen it happen in my time in Wisconsin, because we have, Republicans are in leadership in both the Assembly and the Senate, and so those legislative leaders speak very closely together. I think that you would see more likely the need for a conference committee if Democrats held one house and Republicans held the other house, because then you have two political parties that are in opposition needing to find common ground and pass the same version. But right now, because there's one party's in control of both houses, there is a lot of agreement and a lot of great communication between the two. Anyway, so both houses have now passed the budget bill, and the budget then is sent back to the governor for veto or passage. The governor in Wisconsin is unique. The governor can line item veto pieces of the joint finance or the final bill that joint finance prepared and was passed through by the houses. So cannot scratch out individual letters, but can line item, can take out a sentence, phrases, dollar amounts, and can veto and then still sign the full bill, or can pass it as it is drafted. Though typically the governor will veto elements of the budget bill, and then it goes back to the legislature for possible overrides. Right now, there's not enough votes for such an override to happen. So once the governor signs the bill into law, it then becomes state law. It's published by the Legislative Reference Bureau, and then state agencies implement the budget provisions. This also includes the state compensation plan, which is sort of wage and rates and all kinds of technical things for state employees and the operations of state government. But that compensation plan then does need to go back to the legislature for approval, but I don't want to spend time on that today. But know that the process is not done. The budget process, like I said, it's a 2-year cycle, and for some folks it never stops. And that is state agencies. They're either preparing the budget or they're implementing the budget. All right, so that actually does get us to the point where I want to make sure that we are talking about the opportunities that the public or you as an advocacy organization may have the opportunity to engage in the budget process along the way, and how might that engagement differ from a typical legislative process. So any other questions at this time, or I would love to talk with you about this, where you think these opportunities might be.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Jen. Just quick, I do have a question in the chat from Angelica, referring to the public hearings. So do you feel, or have you seen a difference in impact in submitting a written comment versus attending in person at these hearings?
Like I said, I think that this is I'm not seen that they've so publicly published an ability to make written comment about the state budget. So it will be interesting to watch if it does have an impact, or how are they publishing what people submit. Like I don't know. And really, to know what the public is saying, you have to attend the public hearings. Potentially WPHCA does broadcast them online, but how much influence? I think it depends on the issue. I think it depends on how many people show up about a certain thing. So, one example that I think this is why a widely used example of coalition work appearing, or effective advocacy appearing at public hearings, is AARP. So they come out in droves to all the public hearings. They all wear their bright red AARP shirts. They all, members are volunteering and providing their 2-minute individual testimony about certain issues. It's very clear that they are organized and have figured out the talking points and what they want shared, and maximizing the ability to say their piece at these public hearings. I don't know that I have like a good measurement of how much that impacted decision making back in, right? Because joint finance doesn't make any decisions there during the public hearing. They just receive the information, and really then they take that back into their other committee sessions when they're working through amendments and discussion and debate about the bill. I think things are certainly referenced, organizations. I think they also receive input from the public or advocates, directly, right? Folks are working directly with legislative offices of members of joint finance. And so that they're taking that into account as well, or they should be taking that into account. So I don't know that I can draw a direct line. Yeah.
It's always interesting to see how new technology like plays a role, and it's just another avenue to provide feedback. But it's always slightly impossible to gauge how much a single a single opinion or advocacy moment affects legislation, but as they come together, that's when you kind of see how it comes out.
I think it can be easier to see through the regular legislative process, less so because the budget is just so massive. And whereas like if you're attending a committee hearing for just a regular smaller bill, it's dealing with one issue at a time. Often those bills are like maybe 2 pages long. Like it really can be changing a couple words in state law. And you can see sometimes like directly from someone's testimony, folks on those committees making wanting to make amendments to the bill based on that testimony right then and there. And they can have it. And so you can see it a little bit, the impact a little bit quicker and more so in smaller committees. So.
Are there any additional questions from anyone?
Or thoughts about the, opportunities to engage?
Can you clarify, what are you asking us this? Where do you think there are opportunities for the public to engage? Oh, okay.
Yeah, and I can go through some of the different ones, but I'm hoping that you all maybe thought through or thought about some of the ways that, within that process where beyond sort of public hearings can you work? Can you speak to a legislator or be engaged?
Yeah, the first thing I thought of was like keeping in mind, knowing how the budget works, as I would imagine you could get involved right away by writing to the legislators in like your, I don't know if you call it your district or your region or whatever it is. And encouraging others to do so as well.
Yeah, definitely. Excuse me. Yeah. And particularly if your legislator is a member of joint finance, right? So you as a constituent going and speaking to your legislator, because they're directly on that committee. So that can have an impact on the bill. So if your legislator is not on joint finance, then folks are still able to go as a constituent and speak to their legislator. But then maybe what your ask is, or what you're looking for, is for them to speak to a joint finance committee member or connect you with one, or so not they're your legislator may not be involved in all things. They may not, what committee they're on is important too. What abilities they have to make changes to the bills in their committee. Certainly however, there is that opportunity, right? Every bill is going to the floor. There is the ability for folks, for legislators to propose amendments to each bill, including the budget bill, from the floor of that session. So eventually, if the bill makes its way through the entire process, as the budget bill does, your legislator will have a say in it, whether or not they're on joint finance. Their amendment may not get passed, but they could propose one.
And then Jen, there's a question from Bella in the chat. And I think it's another example of where we can inform. So how are we notified about committee hearings? So if a community health center wanted to inform on a bill and there's only 24 hours notice, how does that notification come through?
Sure. So I'm going to assume that Rochelle and Carly are like on it,
Yes.
and they're like watching these, and they're going to let you know. So that's one way, right? So your organization that has government affairs folks that are monitoring this, who are on these notification services, who are gonna, when a bill gets introduced or they're seeing it circulate for co-sponsorship, they're already going to start thinking about the impacts of it, what the changes are. They're going to start, with their developing talking points that could lend itself for testimony. They are, they're on top of it, and they're going to let you know when you can help. However, if you want, it's available to the public. That is the thing. And, and we'll pass along the legislative website. There is what is called the notification service. The emails are very dry. It's just the basic information. So you really kind of have to learn how to read them and understand what's going on. But as soon as the committee hearing is scheduled and posted for public knowledge, and like I said, it has to be at least 24 hours in advance of the hearing. So it's not going to happen. I mean, I think there is a way that they can call emergency hearings. However, it would be very rare and weird circumstances that would invoke such a thing. But so at a minimum, it'd be 24 hours notice. You'll get an email from this notification service letting you know, so you can sign up for alerts about a particular bill. You can sign up for alerts about certain keywords. You can sign up for alerts about a particular committee. So any action the committee is going to take, or anytime something gets scheduled with the committee, you can get a notice that has happened. And that also includes executive actions. So when the committee schedules their meeting to take the vote, that gets publicly posted and sent via this alert system as well. So notification service on the legislative website is a great thing. Any other thoughts about where the public can engage in the budget process?
Well, when the governor sends the letter to the agencies, like, you could engage with the agencies at that time.
Yes, that's exactly what I was looking for. And that's why I stressed the agency work in this, because it's not, oftentimes folks think that, nope, it's only after the budget's been introduced and I can only connect with joint finance, or I can only do those public hearings. No, for example, for your work, I would imagine that you want to be connecting with DHS and potentially even before the governor's letter, knowing that the agencies, right, they're going to start that work back in February. So getting in with them early or building that relationship. So if it's not happening in this budget cycle, they're not stopping that work, and they're going to just keep continuing. And so being a stakeholder to help prepare for even the next biennium.
Great, Jen, I think we have about 5 more minutes for discussion, and then I'm going to hand it over to Rochelle to go through some of our just next steps for our Capital Day next week. So if anyone has any additional questions or thoughts, let us know. And I think you have another slide too for.
I think just, yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, feel free to contact me. Carly can share these slides, and I can get together some links to share, including that notification service and resources that LRB and Ledge Council have about the process. So.
Awesome. Thanks, Jen. Jeremy, do you have a question?
Sure. So this is kind of for Jennifer and Wipka. How I've never thought of reaching out to an agency for kind of our advocacy work. And I guess I would turn to the two of you for that. Or is that something that we should be developing relationships with these agencies? Or is it better, to kind of have WPHCA as an umbrella do that? And I guess Jennifer, you could answer that too.
Well, I'll let them speak for your organization and how you go about that for your association. So
I can jump in on this one. So WPHCA does meet with kind of the folks that oversee the health center program at DHS every month. And we really do use that opportunity to funnel up the issues that we're hearing from all of you. So we do that in a regular kind of ongoing basis, but there are lots of health centers that do have, if the secretary of DHS is visiting, try to have her come by for a tour in that area, or kind of get the issues top of mind for you in front of those decision makers. Or there are kind of more in the weeds opportunities, like, I'm thinking about DHS is implementing this pharmacist as a billable provider type thing right now. And there'll be like a work group developed with pharmacy folks to inform the rulemaking process for that. So there are sort of really in the weeds things that definitely health center experts like your medical director, or opportunities to sit on boards and commissions through the agencies might be engaged with, or helping us understand if there's something that you really feel like DHS is not paying attention to or needs to be escalating. Those are certainly opportunities that we could pull together a group. Like last fall, we held a series of meetings with the state's dental director where we brought in health center staff to talk about what you're seeing in terms of staffing shortages. So certainly always let us know if you feel like, a conversation isn't happening, or if they're missing information on something, and we can at least facilitate or coordinate those discussions. And whether you have independent relationships with agency staff, that can be good too. So I think it's a both and.
Yeah, I think one of the things that while we're going through all of the opportunities, most of the public needs to be somewhat aware of how to access this information for the most part. And then number two is that WPHCA and mostly Rochelle does a lot of that work on your behalf. And we try to make this process as easy as possible, because the 15 steps were a very simplified story, and it can be a complicated process at some points. All right. Well, if there's no additional questions, Jen, I just want to say thank you so much for the presentation and driving us through the whole legislative process. It's always a trip.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you. And we'll send out your slides, which has your contact information. And thank you. Bye, Jen. Now I'm going to just hand it over to Rochelle. Sorry if you can hear Kira, she was being dramatic. But I hand it over to Rochelle to go over some steps for next week.
Thanks, Carly. And thank you again so much, Jen. It was really great to hear your perspective on all of this. And I think for any health centers that we haven't worked with closely on this work before, we just want to make any of this easy for you. So you could spend your whole day tracking things going on in the legislature every day. That is why I try to do it for you. However, if there are particular issues that you are especially interested in that are not WPHCA kind of priorities that we're working on, we certainly can chat about that and figure out what are ways to kind of keep you apprised or identify opportunities, because there may be things that you have a professional interest in that we could coordinate on also. So my section here today will really just be logistics and preparation for our State Policy and Issues Forum, which is taking place in Madison next week, Wednesday. So if you are not attending that, or if folks from your health center are not attending that, you are welcome to hop off the call here. This is basically prep for that activity. These slides will also be available to you, and we've got some additional resources that we're going to send along. So we haven't had this event in person since before COVID, so we're really excited. There are 50 health center staff and board members registered to attend. And this is what you can expect. So for anyone arriving for our reception, that'll take place the evening before. It's at a location right near the Capitol. So come on by anytime between 4:30 and 6:30. We'll have snacks and tasty beverages at the Great Dane. And then Wednesday is a full day, both with training in the morning and then visits in the Capitol in the afternoon. So that morning, come join us for breakfast, and then we'll do a little bit of housekeeping. And then we do have the Lieutenant Governor Sarah Rodriguez joining us to have a chat with us in the morning. We'll do a little bit of a political overview on the state of the state in Wisconsin. And then we'll dig into policy priorities and how to have effective legislative meetings. And then basically our whole group will transition from our training location, which is nearby the Capitol, to the Capitol itself. And we'll do legislative visits all afternoon long. That is our general plan. Absolutely available to answer logistical questions for you, but a lot of this will be in written documents that you will receive via email. We do also have a space in the Capitol that folks can throw your jackets and put snacks and come back in between meetings. So we've got what I call the resting room, so that you can, bring your laptop and do work in between meetings or talk with us about how your meetings went. Just want to make that space available to folks throughout the day. So just a typical meeting, what this looks like, I handle all of the meeting scheduling. So no one on this call is responsible for setting up the meetings with your legislators. We've been doing that. So we've got, I think so far about 50 of the meetings scheduled, and I'll finish up the last few in the next 2 or 3 days. And then basically I'll give you those schedules, and with your health center group, you'll head around the Capitol to these meetings for the afternoon. You may meet with the legislator or you may meet with their staff. Either is great. On our scheduled Wednesday next week, the legislature is actually in session, which means a lot of people will be in the building, but they may also be taking votes on legislation, which means it may not be the lawmakers, it may be their staff who is available for us, which is great. Often staff are really in the weeds on issues, or can put a bug in the ear of the lawmaker to pay attention to things or vote on things or take action. It can be really effective to have a good relationship with staff. And the way that we'll schedule the meetings is basically there'll be the legislator or their staff, and then any health centers that have locations in their district who are sending folks to our event next week, we would try to get included in that meeting. Sometimes people are getting double booked, so you may need to split up a little bit, but that's generally what we aim to accomplish. So there may be more than one health center in the meeting is your takeaway there. So for example, a good one is Senator Quinn represents the northwestern corner of Wisconsin. He's got Lake Superior as well as some North Lakes clinics, and I think a Marshfield Dental Clinic in his area. So we might have health center folks from all 3 of those in the meeting with Senator Quinn, unless people are getting double booked, in which case I'll split you up and try to send you to the right places. We'll have a WPHCA staff person will also be assigned to each health center group. This person can help facilitate, kind of MC the meeting, watch the time, and kind of do the logistics, but it is your role as the health center staff, and if you're sending board members to the event, to really be the content, the subject matter experts for the meeting itself. We'll have a note taker, hopefully the WPHCA staff person, making note of what's going well in the meeting, what questions are coming up, any follow-up, and then returning those documents to us. And really the content of the meeting will vary from meeting to meeting. So if it's a lawmaker that your health center has never met with before, this is just a great opportunity to introduce yourselves. What is your health center all about? What makes you unique in your community? Where are your service locations? If it's a lawmaker that you have an established relationship with, really get into more dialogue with them. What are the issues that they're working on this session? How can you be of help to them as a constituent resource? So, if this is new work to you, having a conversation with the other staff at your health center to understand, is this someone we already know, or is this a new someone to us? would be really helpful. Because you don't want to go into those meetings blind. If this is someone that like you guys have been working with for years, you don't want to start with an overview of your health center. That's not a great use of your time. So kind of come in prepared, you know, talk with your CEO, talk with your comm staff, talk with whoever's been doing advocacy work to figure out what is our existing relationship with this person or their staff. Did they just visit our health center last month? If so, don't do the overview stuff. Kind of follow up with them. Here is a sample meeting agenda. Again, a half hour goes by really quickly for these meetings because there's always like a little bit of, oh, how are you? You know, oh, the weather. That always happens in the beginning of these meetings, just kind of settling in. But your WPHCA facilitator will hopefully get you there on time. You'll do quick introductions. What's your name? What's your health center? What's your role? And again, you might have board members, you might have health center staff, could be a combination of folks in the room. And then hopefully you, if there's 2 health centers in this example, you can divide up that time evenly. So I will ask you to be, you know, respectful of the other clinics in the meeting to allow everyone a chance to share what's going on at their health center. And the more kind of specific little things that you can share what you're excited about, the better. So maybe it's an update on a HOPE grant that your health center received, or you're working on building a new dental clinic, or you're identifying a new school-based partnership. Those tidbits can be really exciting, kind of be like a little hook for the legislator. Something else I think is important to keep in mind is pausing for questions. Oh, you know, senators, any more information I can provide about that? Or is this issue something you've been hearing about in your community? These meetings are a great opportunity to build a dialogue. And if it's really one-sided, sometimes the legislator or the staff gets disengaged. So stopping to ask questions, ask if there's any follow-up you can provide. Hopefully the second health center will also have that same amount of time to share what's going on for them. And then, you know, save some more time for questions in the end. Is there anything up here we can follow up on? Would you like to come and visit us at the health center? We would love to have you, so make that ask. And then we do have some priorities that I'll go through here. And there are a few items that we're going to ask you to make the ask on. So an example of that would be, you know, we really enjoyed meeting with you today. One of the pieces of legislation that we're here supporting is a bill related to Medicaid postpartum. Are you willing to co-sponsor that bill? It can be kind of hard to just launch that request out there and stop and wait for them to say, oh, I don't know, or yes, or let me look into it. And it'll probably be the latter. It'll probably be the let me look into it, or, oh, I heard about that. But make the ask. The more you do it, the more comfortable you'll get with it, I promise. And you might even find that the first meeting you stumble over making an ask, and that's okay. But maybe the next one you're willing to go for it. And we will have talking points and information about all of those asks for you. If it's a legislator that you've never met with before, really just focus on that relationship development. That's okay too. And then maybe you'll have a follow-up call with them next week and ask them if there's anything that they want to touch base on or something they wanted more information about. We do want to make sure that you end your meeting on time, or if you're back to back, which is quite possible next Wednesday afternoon. So I've got a health center schedule that has 6 meetings in the row all afternoon. Very excited for you. Make sure that you start on time and end on time. And even if the legislator is talking a lot, check in with them a few minutes before your meeting is supposed to end, because they're probably not watching their own schedule. And hopefully the WPHCA staff person will be able to interrupt and say, oh, I see we've just got a few minutes left here today. Representative, is there anything else you really wanted to make sure that we touch base with you on? So start and end on time. Otherwise, you might have challenges getting to your next meetings, and we want to be respectful of their time as well. These tips and tricks will be in a document, so I won't go over them today, but we will also discuss them during our day of training Wednesday morning. There are policy issues that we're working on, as well as budget issues. As Jen noted, we're in the big budget season, but there are also other bills that are making their way through the legislative process right now. Oh, I see a question from Ken. When will we know our schedule? I'm still hearing back from legislative offices today and tomorrow, I will publish the preliminary schedule on Friday and send that out in an email to everyone. Pending changes, if anything comes up, you know, stuff might still change Friday, Monday, hopefully not Tuesday, but basically meetings are being held between 12:30 and 4 p.m. And most health centers attending will have at least 3 or 4 meetings in that time frame. These are some of the state budget priorities that we are working on. Again, we will go through these on Wednesday, but just want to give you a heads up about them. The more you can talk about workforce and staffing issues, the more they'll be tied to some of the policy and budget issues that we are collectively focusing on. But it's also just great in these meetings to talk about what you are most excited about at your health center. As I noted, there are some bills that are making their way through the legislative session too. As Jen noted, you know, hearings come up and are a really great opportunity to share support. One of them was just announced. There will be a hearing on the Medicaid postpartum bill on the 29th. So that's definitely something that we're going to flag in these meetings because that's a bill that we support, which will provide longer Medicaid coverage for pregnant women after the birth of their child. So we're going to flag this for people in the meeting and say, hey, this bill has been introduced. We support it. We think that Medicaid coverage for pregnant women is important. And there's a hearing coming up. Will you please co-sponsor this bill to show support in advance of that hearing? It is definitely not your job to have all of the really detailed policy information about anything. You can refer those questions to me. So, you know, I'm not sure the answer to that question. It's a really good one. I'd love to follow up. I'll have our government relations person, Rochelle, follow up with you on that. And then that'll be noted on our little sheet. And then I will follow up with them with that information, hopefully. These are some of those asks, which I noted. So the Medicaid postpartum bill, we do expect dental therapy to come back again this year. So talking about your oral health staffing issues will be helpful. And then anything related to workforce. So we are really honing in on apprenticeship programs, support for area health education centers, and strengthening our state loan assistance program. So anything related to workforce and staffing is wonderful. We have a lot of documents that we are preparing for you. So we'll have folders for all of your meetings with sort of WPHCA, what is a health center? There will be issue briefs on postpartum and dental therapy and workforce and Medicaid. Something that we do prepare for every legislator is the second one on the left, which is the legislator in particular with a map of their district and the health centers in their district. So this is a really useful tool. It'll also show how many of their constituents were served by health centers, which is absolutely a number that I highlight in every meeting I go to. We want to say, Senator Baldwin, we served 6,000 of your constituents with primary care services last year. That's a very powerful thing for them to understand. Finally, we have some new items. We have legislator bios. So there's information about every single lawmaker, what committees they're on, when they were elected, and where they're from. That is a new resource for all, which we'll send after the meeting today. There are webinar recordings, and then this is what you should be preparing. We've got a little kind of a checklist for you on this too that we're providing. The kind of know before you go, the prep guide here, which I'm referencing. But it would be great to prepare collateral from your health center. So a one-page document that has some UDS data, how many patients you served, maybe an annual report, any recent press coverage, like, oh, we opened this new site and here's a letter from our local paper about it. Those are wonderful resources. It's really up to you specifically what you provide. I'm seeing a question on the folders. Looks like Carly answered that one. Kim has a question on whether we can provide the schedules sooner. Oh, the documents. All of these documents I will send out tomorrow morning. So this will all be available for you. The schedules themselves, I don't want to send until Friday because they're continuing to change, but every single one of these documents, including the legislator bios, are ready now. So we'll get those out to you right away, and then you're able to share them with whoever you like. Yeah, those are kind of the items to prepare. And let me see if I have everything else. So as I noted, email with the planning materials I'm going to send tomorrow, and then the logistics and schedules, all of that, you know, where to park, where's all this happening, that'll come in a second logistics email, most likely on Monday. So we are right at time here, and I want to be mindful of that. Are there any immediate questions I can answer? Otherwise, I am happy to take questions via email or offline. Love the question from Jeremy on swag, keychain, toothbrush. I think that would be welcome. I went to a visit with a member of Congress where there was like a little dental takeaway bag, and I thought that was nice. So that is up to you. Sometimes I see folks walking around and they have like something they give to every lawmaker. We're not going to do that. Dress for this event is like business casual. We will have, if you ordered a shirt with registration, we'll encourage you to wear those day of. So we'll have them all available on either at the reception or Wednesday morning at the latest. I'll be wearing that with pride, which I'm excited about. Otherwise, comfortable shoes, like we're either walking around the Capitol or taking elevators up and down, and we'll have maps and all of that, but be prepared to mosey around the building for the afternoon, and it's going to be a really exciting day. Any questions? Anything else I can answer right now?
Inviting people to the reception on Tuesday. Do you want us to run them by you? I don't know. Or are you inviting other legislators or?
Yeah, we invited all legislators, but that's a really good point. If your House Center is attending the reception on Tuesday, I think it is a wonderful opportunity for you to do outreach to your legislators and let them know you're going to be there. So let me write that down to put that in an email. If they hear it from you, that would be a great reminder. Wonderful question, Jeremy. Anything else?
Well, we're all very excited to see you next week. It's coming up. So thank you guys. And yeah, any questions, please don't hesitate to let us know. And we're preparing everything we can. So thank you guys for joining. Have a good afternoon.